Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MindsetGo Radio Show. It's Thursday. I don't even have that excuse, but hey, welcome to the MindsetGo Radio Show. I'm Mark Altman. Good to have you back again with us today. And we're actually continuing our conversation about apology last week. We got a lot of feedback on how effective and how helpful the information was, so we're going to extend the topic. And we focused so much on last week's show about things like why apologies are so difficult, what are the important pieces to an effective apology, the benefits of apologizing, and really why apologies are so difficult. We spent a lot of time about getting what gets in the way of apologies, and so much of executing apologies is around the mindset in whatever you internalize as the problems with apologies, and how you shift your mindset in your head about why it would be bad as opposed to why it would be good. And one of the primary things we talked about in that regard was how making apologies could create a lot of guilt. But we talked about really what it does is if you don't apologize, it can create shame. And the difference between guilt and shame is feeling bad about your actions is guilt, and feeling bad about yourself is shame. And I think it's somewhat intuitive on the difference between those two things. And we ended last week's show when we said we were talking about when I'm sorry isn't enough. And we talked about the parts of an effective apology that has to say, beyond just saying I'm sorry, it has to include three other components, which is how you feel, which is your ability to express remorse, admitting your mistake, the specific and tangible mistake, and the negative impact it had, and not assuming it, confirming it. And lastly, we talked about, to make it right, what can you do differently next time? What process, what behavior, what habit can you change or develop to prevent or minimize it from happening next time? And so that was so much of the focus on last week's show. And today we're going to talk about some different things around apology. And the first thing we're going to talk about how it's never too late. And there's a bit of an assumption when you're apologizing that there's almost like a window of time that's appropriate to apologize. And if you miss that window of time, you lose the ability to apologize. And that's not the case. It's never too late. Now, there's a couple things that we didn't get to last week that I want to cover. There are some do's and don'ts about apologizing that are really in person. And one of them is the where and when you apologize. Apologizing via email or text, not cool. And I understand a lot of people listening might say, well, it depends on the severity of the issue and what am I apologizing for. And yes, that's true. But you never can go wrong. Your first choice is in person whenever possible. And if in person is just not reasonable or realistic, then do it over the phone. Because words, we know that phones and social media have really impacted people's interpersonal skills, and where it can be very hard to make that eye contact and deliver the apology, it's much more meaningful. And we hear a lot of complaints now where people will give criticism or feedback at any age, in any industry, because they can hide behind a keyboard. And it really, in my mind, affects the authenticity if you can't hear your voice. First of all, if you're not in person, I can't see your body language. Okay? And if you're on the phone, I can't see your body language. And if it's in person, I can see the listening, the body language, the tone, the word choice. So whenever possible, regardless of the severity. Now, here are the things that often interfere with an effective apology. And last week, we talked so much about how to deliver the apology. Now we're talking about words and things you can do that would interfere effectively with the apology. One of them, the biggest one we talked about, is expecting the response you get after you make the apology. That is the biggest interference. But here are some things. No excuses. Putting the word but. Right? Every time you make a comment, whether it's an apology language or just common conversational intelligence, and you say, well, I really feel this way, but, the but negates everything you said before it, and all people are paying attention to is what you say after it. if I have a student that I'm training. If I have a leader that I'm coaching and I say, boy, Bill, you're doing a great job, but he didn't even hear the great job. Now, one of my biggest pet peeves when someone's making an apology is when you say, I'm sorry you feel that way. Because you're not saying you're sorry for your own action. You're sorry that you're upset, that they're frustrated or angry or disappointed at something you've done. That phrase, I'm sorry you feel that way, is extremely condescending. It's very passive-aggressive, and it actually counters the goal of an apology, and it really says you're the one with the problem. So those things, avoiding the use of but, avoiding I'm sorry you feel that way, the where and when, and one other point before we move on, and that is that when you talk about the when, it's important to understand people's strengths and weaknesses. A lot of people will say, I'm morning people, I'm night people. You know, you apologize to someone after a long day of work or a long day of school, their defenses might be up. They might be tired. They might not be in the right emotional mind to hear your apology. Maybe they've already dealt with a lot of issues. So as best you can, and as well as you know the other person, try to understand when would be a good time and a comfortable time for them to hear your apology, because it's about them, not about you. Now, one of the things I used to tell my customer service team at my old company is when someone called up to complain and they were angry and they felt wronged, not only hear them talk, but don't get caught up in the blame. Don't get caught up in who started it. I told them that I wanted their response to be, tell me what's wrong, tell me how you'd like us to fix it, and let's address the blame later. Or I wouldn't even say let's address the blame later. I said, we'll figure out how this happened later. But the real problem is how are we going to fix this right now? And so the whole thing there is it puts the whole focus on problem solving. It puts the whole focus on how we're going to repair it. And remember what I said last week about validation. It doesn't, when you say, how do you want us to fix it? You're not giving them an open check or open book to say you'll do whatever they ask. You're just understanding what's going through their mind in that point and how they want to make it right. There's nothing wrong with asking the question. You're not making a promise in that moment. So from a customer service perspective, it's, I'm sorry, our mistake affected this, right? Remember Dr. Lazar said that. I'm sorry, what happened, how it affected in the room. I'm sorry, our mistake affected this. Or I'm sorry, this mistake. If you don't want to take blame, I'm sorry, this mistake affected this. Then it comes down to let the person talk, let the person vent, let the person share their frustration, and then you can decide how you want to handle it and what options you have at that point. We've got to avoid a repeat performance, everybody. The whole key is it's one thing to express regret. It's another thing to make up for it. It's another thing to truly empathize and understand how you wronged that person and maybe how you wronged yourself. But it's really key to understand what steps are being put in place so I don't have to go through this again and you don't have to go through this again. Think of how powerful that would be. In business, you've wronged a customer, you fix the problem, and you call the customer back and said something along the lines of, as a result of this incident, we had a team meeting and we've put the following steps in place to ensure this doesn't happen again because we don't want you to have to go through this again. Can you imagine if you uttered that exact script? Can you imagine what the response would be on the other line? How excited they would be? That's good business. That's blending in all the components of apology. No excuses. You don't want to be associated with excuses. You don't want to hear them. You don't want to give them. You don't want to depend on excuses at any point for your actions for an apology. You want to be accountable. You want to be responsible. You want to be vulnerable so people know your true intent and the impact you caused and who you are. That's who you want to be. When we come back after the break, we're going to switch total gears. And instead of talking so much about giving an apology, we're going to talk about how to accept an apology. This is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Mindset Go radio show. We're talking about apologies, and we are switching gears to how to accept an apology. And there are three parts to this process, and it starts with assessing the apology. And I start with that because, let's face it, we're doing it, right? Once you receive an apology, your whole mind in that moment is, here's how it starts, right? The first is when someone makes an apology, you're immediately making a judgment. You're either surprised because the person doesn't have a history of doing it, and you're like, that's interesting. Hopefully you're saying that's impressive because of the courage and confidence it takes to make an apology, a sincere one. And if they have a track record of making bad apologies, using excuses, saying the word but, shifting blame, then you're totally turned off to it. But that's the first thing we typically do is our radar is up to assess the genuine nature of the apology. So here's what we're doing. So we're paying attention to the word choice. Are they using the word I? Is the sound of their voice, is it authentic? The tone of their voice. What's their body language look like? Are they making eye contact? All these things right out of the gate. Word choice, tone, body language. Are those to my, and I'm saying this intentionally, are those to my satisfaction? I want to know. So that's part one. Now let's assume the person passes your test of part one. And I say your test facetiously because that's fair. It's legitimate. Those are three things we typically look at, and rightfully so, because those are the effective aspects of communication and being a confident, effective communicator. Okay, so we're off to a good start. Now, are they passive-aggressive in any way? And as I said before, passive-aggressive would be, I'm sorry you feel that way. That would be an example. Or let's say someone did you wrong and you say, well, I asked you to go to the party with me, but you refused. So see, you shift and you're using you statements as the emphasis of the apology. There should be no you when you apologize. It's I. It's your accountability, your responsibility. And I spoke last week about even if it takes two to tango, and the other person had a part in this, maybe you're modeling a behavior that motivates them and encourages them to apologize because you took the first step. Not that it's your responsibility to do that, and not that you should feel that burden, but you take care of your house. You make sure your house is clean. You do what you're supposed to do and let them acknowledge and be accountable for their own behavior, but don't bring it up in your apology. I think it's important to rely on your instincts. This expression, can I trust my gut? Trust my gut. I was doing a training yesterday on emotional intelligence, and a woman said, I don't think I can trust my gut. And I said, well, why would you say that? And she said, well, I feel like I've made a lot of bad decisions. And I said, have you made any good decisions when you've trusted your gut? She said, yes. But I feel like I've made more bad ones, and the consequences of the bad ones have been deeper. So I said, is it the problem that you can't trust your gut, or is it the problem that your decision-making process isn't where it needs to be? And so she smiled and she goes, I never thought of it that way. It's probably more my decision-making process. The problem is when you question your own instincts, right? If your gut, when receiving an apology, is your gut telling you the person is being honest and sincere? Do you have feelings of doubt? All you have is your observation skills and your listening skills. But you have to trust your gut. You're a smart person. I'm assuming you have enough of a template for people over the course of your life that have been honest, that have been sincere, that have apologized authentically, so you know what's the difference between right and wrong. But it is important to rely on your gut instinct. And most of the time when people question their gut instinct, they shouldn't. There's another aspect going on that they should question, such as problem-solving skills, such as critical thinking skills, such as decision-making skills, but it's not their actual gut instinct that's the problem. Now, one of the things that gets in the way of accepting apologies is whether you're ready to accept the person's apology. I've had situations in my life where I wasn't ready to accept it. And so the person didn't get the response they wanted. I appreciated the sentiment and the tone, but I wasn't ready to accept it. You're okay to say that. You can say, thank you for your overture. I'm going to have to process it as I'm not sure I'm ready to accept the apology. There's nothing wrong with that statement. It's not a yes or no. It's not black and white. There's a gray area. You do have time to process and think about it. You also have time to come back and have another conversation, right? So when someone makes that initial apology and you're not expecting it or ready to accept it, you can say, I'd like to revisit this and have another conversation, and I'll let you know when I'm ready. Now, when you say I'll let you know when I'm ready, if you're the apologizer and you are really genuine and remorseful, I would encourage you to say, okay, would you mind if I don't hear from you, if I could check back in just to see if you are ready? Now, that a lot of people might not like that, but the problem if you don't ask that and then the person forgets and doesn't ever bring it up again, now where are you? So I like having some, and if the person says, I'll let you know, then you just have to respect that. But maybe the person says, yeah, okay, you can check back with me next week or this weekend or whatever. So either way, you have a follow-up plan in the next steps. Look, at the end of the day, no matter what, thank the person for the apology. It takes a lot of confidence and courage. Explain your feelings, what they were, why you were hurt. If they haven't suggested what they could do differently next time, you do it. You tell them how they could be different next time. And one of the big things with apology and accepting apology is the difference between saying I understand versus saying it's okay. So a lot of times we default to, that's okay, don't worry about it. If it wasn't okay, don't say it was okay. You can say, I understand. I accept your apology and I understand. But it is really critical that if the person isn't delivering the apology the way you want, if they don't have an action plan, if they don't understand the impact of what they did, you can share that with them. You can tell them. You can educate them. It's really important. So much of accepting the apology, a lot of people feel like that conversation's a one-way street, but it really isn't. The person receiving the apology can speak their mind using the same respect and kindness when it comes to tone and word choice and body language. It's very, very important. And a lot of times I see in the workplace, when it comes to leadership, there's a mindset of when you ask someone how you can do it differently next time, that person who shares it becomes a high maintenance person. Oh, well, I guess I have to use extra care now when I talk to this person because they're super sensitive. That is a real quandary in the workplace when people confuse sensitivity and being high maintenance with being comfortable advocating for what they need and want. Big difference between those two things. But that stigma of, oh my God, I got to deal with them differently. I talk often about a mindset issue when it comes to this, and it's the difference between wanting to do something, needing to do something, or having to do something. So when you communicate with people in the workplace and you're trying to be accountable and you're talking about apology, if you ask that question, how can I make this right? Or they tell you how you can make it right, and you see that as a chore or a burden, then don't even bother asking. Because if that's your mindset, it's going to come across as a chore or burden with your body language and your words. So want to do it, not because they're sensitive and high maintenance, because they're human. And frankly, it's a positive compliment that they're comfortable to advocate for themselves. So when we come back for our third segment, we're going to talk about how you can put your acceptance into action and how to take those next steps forward to have the follow-through and have the integrity you desire. This is Mark Altman, Mindset Go Radio Show. We'll be back. Welcome back to the Mindset Go Radio Show. I'm Mark Altman. Happy to have you back with us on this Thursday afternoon. And we've been talking about apology, and we're talking about putting your acceptance into action. And what I mean by that is your apology has been accepted. You have made, and a key word here being commitment. You have made a commitment to do something differently, to build the process, to make amends, to make reparations. You've made a commitment to be mindful of this person's feelings, of how they want to be treated, how they want to be communicated with, and now you're putting the plan into action. Okay? So one of the things that's interesting about this is there can be an awkward period after an apology because you've really acknowledged you've done something wrong. They've accepted the apology, but what happens next so kind of life goes back to normal, whatever that means. So it might seem forced or corny, but one of the things I suggest is find a way to spend some quality time with that person. Now, if it's a coworker at work and not an intimate relationship, have a cup of coffee with them. Talk about their weekend. Have lunch with them. Sit at their desk and ask them if you can help them with anything. Take some initiative, show some empathy, do any of those things to break that awkward period in between. Because a lot of this, when you make an apology, a lot of what happens is you might not see someone on a regular basis you have to make an apology to. So once that discussion takes place, if you're not going to see that person for another week, month, or a year, and the next time you see them, there's really been no interaction since, it can be a little awkward. So I'm saying that part of the plan here, if appropriate, is to initiate some time with that person that is downtime, relaxing, fun, comfortable conversation to have. Now, one of the things that's very, very tricky with apology is, let's say you've had a great conversation. Both sides have shared, you've gotten to know the person better, you've connected, both sides understand each other better, you're feeling on top of the world, seriously. And both sides really feel good and healthy about the relationship coming out of it. But then what happens if this comes up again? So all this took place, we understand each other, and then the same behavior, habit, act came up again. Now what do you do? So see, to me, this is a very key aspect to address in the apology. And part of this is creating the other person, believe it or not, gets to be put in a position of power. And I'm being a little facetious when I say that, but here's what I mean. So let's say, for example, there's a situation at work where when I'm in a meeting with someone, I forget to ask the person if they have any input or ideas on the topic we're discussing. Okay, so that person says, geez, you don't really acknowledge me in the meetings. I don't really have a chance to share my thoughts and whatever. And so now we've had the conversation, we've talked it out. Part of the apology is to say at the end, look, I'm not perfect. I will make every effort and to put the process in place we discussed. But I want the apologizer to say, but if you catch me doing this behavior again, please let me know and hold me accountable. I don't want you to feel bad to ask. I want you to feel the permission to share with me as a reminder to hold me accountable. You've got to give that person that permission. Because if you don't give the person that permission, if it does happen again, one of two things is going to happen. Again, they're going to lose confidence and trust in you because they're going to question your sincerity because here it is, you said you were going to do this, and now you're repeating the act again. Or they're not going to bother because they feel like their communication with you didn't yield to the outcome and the result they were looking for, so why bring it up again? And I've talked about that. I talk about that in my training, in coaching, and speaking, that you don't communicate with people for the hope of an outcome. You do hope there's an outcome, and you're communicating because your intent is to create some kind of habit and behavior change. But that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to develop your own character and habits and patterns to be the person you want to be. So you've got to give that permission to the person to bring it up again. And even then, they're probably not going to feel comfortable. But if you have a chance to make them feel comfortable, you have to point that out. So that's a very significant part of apology. Now, I had a situation back almost 20 years ago to the day where I was driving to a business appointment. I was in Palmer, Massachusetts. Was driving on a corner, and as I was turning the corner, I had an 18-wheeler truck smash into my car. I was hurt, not severely hurt, but I was hurt. And it was right in front of a gas station. There was a lot of people who saw it. And I had never been hit by a car like that before. So I had injured my shoulder and neck, but was certainly cognizant enough to get out of the car and function. And the truck driver came over to me and he said, "All right, I guess we should exchange insurance." And I was incredulous. I couldn't believe it. You know why? Because I wanted remorse. I wanted regret. I expected an apology. And not only did I not get one, I didn't even get, acknowledgement of the behavior. Zero, nothing. Now, this was 20 years ago. I'm not as emotionally intelligent as I am now. I didn't have the training or experience I have now. I was livid. I was furious. I went off on the guy. And that was probably the most significant and obvious lack of apology I've had in my life. And I remember thinking, because I didn't get that apology, because I didn't get that accountability, this guy's going to pay. How is he going to pay? Not violently. I'm not a criminal. But how is he going to pay? He was going to pay financially. I was going to sue that company because he didn't give me the result I was looking for. So the act itself was damaging enough, but how we respond instead of react to our behavior, that's when it matters. And so the problem is when you don't give an apology or when your apology isn't accepted, we go into react mode instead of respond mode. And the react mode is what interferes with our emotional intelligence. Once we go into that react mode, it all goes downhill because, again, we're distracted from the motives and intentions we had in having the courage and confidence to apologize in the first place. So when we come back for our final segment, we're going to finish with how to react when your apology isn't accepted and what to do if you need to apologize a second time, which I'm sure many people have had to deal with. So this is Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to our final segment of the Mindset Go radio show, and I hope you've really enjoyed this two-part series on apology. We've really covered a lot of ground in these 2 weeks, and when I do go into companies and talk about emotional intelligence and conflict resolution and prevention, so much of it revolves around accountability, not making excuses, delivering and receiving apologies. So this is such a key communication topic. And when people talk about interpersonal skills, this is such a huge function of interpersonal skills and knowing how to be accountable with your behavior. So we're talking about how to react when your apology isn't accepted. So look, this amazing tool called mindfulness, allows you to keep calm and humble. And we're such a solution-oriented society when we're learning. We want to know how to do it. We want to know what that solution is going to be so I can solve the problem or so I don't have to deal with this again. And believe it or not, mindfulness is the solution to many communication challenges, especially when it comes to body language and word choice and emotional intelligence. So the answer is, when you make that apology, First thing is be mindful you're not going to let necessarily be guaranteed to have your expectations made and how they're going to receive it. So it starts there. Then you have to prepare for how you're going to react if it isn't received. Know that that's a genuine possibility ahead of time. So you're going to keep your facial expressions neutral. You're going to take a deep breath, and you're going to really, really be mindful to avoid being defensive. And the way you avoid being defensive is you maintain this powerful phrase and you stay curious. Be curious. Understand what's going on. Okay? So if they don't react the way and they're still angry and they're still hurt and they're still frustrated, want to explore why. Think about why the apology isn't enough. Maybe it's because you have a track record of this behavior and this is the third, fourth, or fifth time this has happened and they're not really ready to take an apology because of the repeated behavior. Maybe it's because they don't trust you're going to do anything differently after the sorry, and your follow-through isn't very good. And frankly, that should be part of the preparation for the sorry. So when you're anticipating how they're going to react and what their expectations, those are the kind of things you should be taking into consideration, right? Put yourself in their shoes. We talk about empathy all the time. How would you feel if this happened to you? And the problem with that is a lot of people say, well, this wouldn't be a big deal. There's a core value issue. So the danger where putting yourself in their shoes and empathizing is a standard and good advice, it can also get you in trouble. Because if your core values are, you don't see what the big deal is, and this wouldn't bother you, that's going to create more harm than good. So put yourself in their shoes, not because it wouldn't matter to you. Put yourself in their shoes, understanding why it would matter to them, because that's a very different mindset. And then take a break. If they don't accept your apology, maybe it wasn't the right time, maybe it was too soon, maybe some of the other examples I gave were in play, so take a break. Let it sit. Let them process, especially it wasn't expected. Let it fester in a good way. Let them process it and then say, hey, can we continue this conversation, at a different time? Frankly, if you feel like you're about to react instead of respond, if you feel like you're about to be defensive, then you can advocate for the break for yourself, even if you're the apologizer. Now, let's finish the show today by talking about apologizing a second time. That's tough because when someone apologizes a second time to me, what goes through my head is they're really not committed to what they said they weren't going to do anymore, and what would be different this time. So that's what's going through my head. That's how I start the conversation. Okay? So to me, you're still repeating some of the same steps you do in a regular apology. You're summarizing what you did, using all of Dr. Lazar's components. Think of impact versus intention. Think of what you did specifically, how you made them feel. But here's the difference. Ask for clarification, right? So ask them, is there anything else I did that bothered you? And a lot of people might laugh and say, I'm not opening up that can of worms. But if you care enough, you want to open the can of worms. Because if you really care or invested in this relationship, and you're now having to apologize for a second time, you better really get the whole list of things that you're trying to be more sensitive to and strengthen that relationship. And once you have spoken, give them time to speak. It's really about listening. Listening without an agenda, listening without being defensive, listening to understand and not to argue and not to question. That's a big part of this. Now, one of the things we talked about advocating for yourself by giving yourself a break but sometimes you need to address your own concerns. Maybe you can't deliver on what they're asking. Maybe you doubt your ability to do what they're asking. You can say that. You can say that. If you're not sure you can deliver on what they're asking, you can come clean. Because the worst thing you could do is commit to something and not be ready to deliver on it, not think you can deliver on it. But if you commit to something and if you're avoiding committing because you convinced yourself you don't think you can deliver on it, you better discern, is it you don't think you can deliver on it or you don't want to put the effort in to deliver on it? Those are very, very different things. And you could easily rationalize the fact that you don't think you can because you don't want to and you don't want to prioritize it. And what you're really saying is you don't want to prioritize them. So when you get in that mode of apologizing for a second time, the process is similar, but you're exploring more in depth how you can be better for yourself and for that person. And you're also identifying what you could do this time that you didn't do last time to give you a greater chance of success. Now, you've got to make a plan to move forward. First time, second time, you've got to make a plan. Give people space. Don't burn the bridges. Make a plan to avoid both of you being hurt. And I had mentioned earlier about part of the apology saying to the person, hey, be my accountability partner. If this happens again, please let me know. But another thing you can do to build into the moving forward plan is say, hey, I'm going to check in with you in a couple of weeks just to make sure you've noticed an improvement or you can see that I'm really taking this to heart. So check-ins, proactive check-ins are nice. Because then, here's what you're ultimately doing. You're taking the burden off the other person. So if you do repeat the behavior, the burden is upon them to hold you accountable and to speak up. But if you proactively check in and say, look, I'm going to check in and make sure I'm meeting your needs. And I wouldn't even say meeting your needs because that feels condescending. Make sure I'm doing what you asked. That is a proactive measure that really shows caring and follow through and commitment. And look, my final thought for today is some people are just unwilling to forgive. And guess what? They have that right. And that doesn't make them wrong. That doesn't make them bad people. It could be that they have a philosophy and they have core values and you violate it and they're not willing to forgive. Matter of fact, how often do we hear in adultery, people who cheat on each other and they get back together and judgment is abound. Like people say, I can't believe you're giving that person another chance. Well, that's their right. If people want to trust and give them another chance, maybe they'll be rewarded for it, maybe they won't. And if people choose not to forgive, that's their right too. But if you make your decision in choosing to apologize and choosing to take the steps we've discussed in the last 2 weeks, and you're only making that decision because of the outcome you're expecting, and more importantly, the outcome you deserve, it's not the right way, and that's not being accountable. That's having an agenda. That's speaking and listening with an agenda. So if you want to learn more about the training and coaching we do around accountability, conflict resolution and prevention, and emotional intelligence, please contact me at MindsetGo. You can reach us at info@mindsetgo.com or call 978-793-1159. This has been Mark Altman for the Mindset Go radio show. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.